Hey guys, my name is Alicia, and if you don't know who I am, I typically make thrifting videos every single week or videos about sustainable fashion, and today I have a tutorial for you on how to make a top bigger. So a few months ago, I was shopping at the Black Market in Toronto. If you guys don't know what this place is, it's this really cool vintage shop that has a ton of vintage obviously, but also a ton of dead stock items. And when I found this top amongst this pile of dead stock, I just instantly fell in love. I love denim, and this top just had such unique details to it that I just couldn't resist. So I grabbed what I thought was my size, was actually the biggest size that they had, and unfortunately when I got home it did not fit. I could not get that thing over my head. Actually, I managed to get it over my head once, and it was nearly impossible to get off. I almost had to cut it off of my body. So we had an issue. This top was way too small for me, and it was just such a cool top. I couldn't just let it go. I had to make it work. So as you can see, I am currently wearing it, which means I was successful in my attempt of making it bigger. So if you want to see how I did that, definitely stick around for this tutorial where I'm going to show you exactly how I achieve it. So I definitely debated about a few different methods on how to make this top bigger and make it fit me. One of the options I thought of was maybe adding a little lace-up corset kind of thing in the back, which would give me a couple more inches and I could kind of fit it to my body however I wanted. Another option was maybe adding a zipper on the side, because like I said, I could get it on my body. It did technically fit, I just couldn't get it over, so I thought maybe a zipper could work. But ultimately what I ended up deciding to go with is the method of shirring. Shirring is basically a decorative sewing technique that involves stitching together many rows of gathered fabrics. Shirring reduces the size of the original fabric while adding texture to the resulting decorative fabric. So essentially you're taking elastic and shrinking the fabric so it gives it a little bit more stretch, which is exactly what I needed. So if you want to recreate this project, all you're going to need is some scrap fabric, some elastic, and then of course a sewing machine and some sewing supplies. Also, sorry in advance for my terrible nail polish. I should have removed it before I started filming this video, but I didn't realize how bad it looked until I started editing, so apologies. So like I said, this piece is dead stock, which means it was vintage but brand new with tags. And the thing with dead stock is you kind of have to think there was probably a reason why this wasn't sold back in the day, and I think a lot of dead stock is more sample items that weren't quite fully developed and optimized for functionality of actually wearing it, and I think that was the issue with this top. So that is why we're going to be fixing it up and making it even better so it can reach its full potential. So the first thing we're going to do is just cut the piece in half, only on the back side. As you can see, this top does have drawstring details, and I did make the decision to just cut right through the drawstring because I didn't think I was gonna end up weaving it back through the whole thing, but I would just recommend taking any drawstring out if you happen to have that in your top as well, because I ended up just tying it back together, so it was kind of a waste of time. At this point, I also did remove the tag before I cut through the area, just because I wanted to repurpose it and add it back into the top when we're finished, just to make it look more legit and kind of honor the original designer. So once the tag was removed, I just finished cutting through and cutting the top completely in half. Next, you're going to need to measure how much extra fabric you're going to need. So you are going to need a measuring tape. So just take the measuring tape and measure it around your bust, the widest part of your top. And you're also going to go ahead and measure the shirt, the actual top, all the way around. So once you have your two measurements, you're going to take your body measurement minus the top measurement in order to calculate how much extra fabric you're going to need. So for example, my bust measures around 35 inches, whereas the top only measured around 32 inches. So that means I had to add 3 extra inches of fabric in order to make this fit me. Plus, we do want to add an extra 2 inches of seam allowance, meaning that for me personally, I want my extra fabric to measure about 5 inches wide. But because shirring actually shrinks the fabric, we need to overcompensate that and make our scrap piece of fabric about 1/3 times bigger than our measurement. So for me, I would just take my 5 inches, multiply that by 1.33, meaning that in order for my piece to end up being 5 inches, I'm actually going to need to cut out a piece that is 6.65 inches wide. So that is how wide we want it to be. The length, you just obviously want it to be the exact same length as your current top. Of course, just including some extra in order to do the hem. So I just went through my little scrap fabric bin and picked out a couple different shades that I thought would best match this top. Ultimately, I ended up going with this one. And then you can just go ahead and cut out your piece. Next, take your piece and you're gonna wanna draw lines about a 1/2 inch apart. And this is gonna help guide you of where exactly you're going to be sewing your elastic in. I definitely recommend this part because even with the lines, it was still tricky. Some of my lines went a little wonky, so definitely create a guide for yourself. Then you're gonna just cut up enough pieces of elastic for each one of those lines that you drew, and just make sure the length of the elastic matches that original width you calculated. So for me, that 5 inches. Then we can take it to the sewing machine. You're gonna wanna set it just to a regular straight stitch, but with a stitch length quite big, about a 4. Then just go ahead and sew the elastic along each line, just making sure to pull that elastic tight so it reaches all the way to the end of that fabric. As you can see, it starts scrunching up right away, so you can just continue sewing all the way down to the end of the elastic. This part definitely takes some time, although it is easy, especially once you get the hang of it. And in the end, you're gonna end up with your extra piece of fabric, stretchy and shrunk down to that desired size you wanted. And like I said, my lines definitely were not perfect, but as you can see, shirring is very forgiving and it's kind of hard to notice if your lines aren't perfectly straight. Next, I just did a little preliminary ironing of the hem, just to make hemming a little bit easier later down the line. You could definitely hem your fabric before you do your shirring. It would definitely make it a lot easier. Although once you connect it to your top, it's not going to be as clean, so definitely an option. And speaking of, it is time to attach our pieces. So just line up your shirred piece with the existing top and pin it in place right sides together. Then all you're going to do is just sew along that line in order to attach the two pieces. I also just finished my edge with a zigzag stitch just to make sure it doesn't unravel over time. Once the two sides are attached, you can just go ahead and fold that hem over, pinning it in place, and then all you need to do is sew it down. It's definitely a little tricky, like I said, because the fabric is already shirred together, but if you just kind of like pull it apart, kind of like how we did it with the elastic, it is pretty easy. Lastly, I did add some extra buttons to this top just because I'll show you some of the features it has in a second, but adding a few extra buttons allowed me to have more options of placements of the straps. And this is how the top ended up looking with the shirred panel added in the back. I think this ended up turning out really, really good. Yes, it does kind of look like an added piece, especially because the colors don't match perfectly, but I don't think it's honestly that noticeable. And as you can see, that little extra added panel of stretch just gave me just enough room to be able to get this over my head, but have it still fit my body properly once it was on. So overall, this project was super easy. I would definitely recommend it for a top similar cut to this, especially one that's like non-stretch. It just adds that perfect little amount of extra stretch. As promised, I am going to show you all the little cool strap features of this top. So for one, I'll call this default mode, where we just have, you know, regular straps going up and down. This is where the extra button came in handy just because I needed it to be a little bit tighter to fit my shoulders. Option number 2 is you can actually extend the strap a little bit with the second button and do a little crisscross strap in the back, which I think is so fun, so cute, such a fun little added detail. You could totally do this in the front as well, although it's a little bit more of like a stranger look, but it is an option. And then lastly, you can actually completely remove these straps so that it's just a tube top, which is also super cute. The little drawstring definitely helps that really just like fit to your body more. I also discovered after the fact that you can not only do this like weird crossover asymmetrical strap look, but you can even turn this into a halter. So the possibilities are truly endless. And yeah, I just think this top is so cool and I'm so happy that I can finally wear it. I think it was totally worth all the effort I put into it. A few things I would have done differently, I'll share with you guys. One of them is that I kind of stopped the shirring too soon to where the hem is. As you can see, it does get a little bit loosened up at that point. For me, it wasn't a big deal because this top does have a drawstring. It kind of helped gather the rest of that fabric. But if I were to do this on another top, I would definitely continue that elastic really up to that top point of the hem. Honestly, even having a channel going on the inside of the hem, if that makes sense. And I also don't know if you guys noticed, but I actually ended up completely redoing this project just because I made the panel a little bit too big at first, and then it kind of looked a little bit uneven because the panel was like a lot smaller. So feel free to cut off some extra pieces of your top and add them back into your panel width so that it does look a little even and the panel does fill up more of your back portion, if that makes sense. But yeah, I hope this video was helpful for anybody trying to make a top bigger to fit them. If this is your first time checking out my channel, definitely stick around because I post lots more videos about thrifting and sustainable fashion, like I said. And if you're actually having the opposite problem and you're trying to make a top smaller, I actually have a whole video on that as well that I made years ago, but it still has some pretty helpful information in it. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next week.